Today we're going to talk about data sources. I know that's something that pretty much everyone uses in their applications in MindStudio. So I believe this is going to be helpful, but we'll decide later. So I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see it now. Let me go full screen. Okay, so it's customizing your AI applications with your own data. There's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about what the query data source and the RAG and everything else that calls an external data source does in MindStudio. And I hope that today will be the day where everything is clear and you can start using data sources effectively in the applications. There are many, many benefits to doing that. You can save costs on tokens. You can use RAG to explore data sets. You can upload large databases that you would not be able to upload as a file upload. Lots of things that you can do with the RAG and data sources in MindStudio that are not yet, I guess, explained very well in our video. So we're going to do a better job at that, because I do see, like, from the tickets and the community and everything like that, that problems with data sources, and especially how you call a data source, is probably the most common mistake I see. So we're going to look at that and how to fix it and how you can improve it. So you can train applications with your own knowledge, but RAG is not fine-tuning, right? There are two separate terms in MindStudio and in AI in general, which is fine-tuning when you actually create a custom model. So fine-tuning means giving the AI some example prompts, some example outputs, training a custom model, and then using that custom model whenever you call it in your applications. When you use RAG, however, you're just vectorizing a database, and then you're asking the database something. So you can see here that it's a technique that enhances the capabilities of generative models, but it's not a new model on its own. It also retrieves vectors. So it retrieves meaning. It doesn't retrieve particular objects. It just finds a similar meaning to what you're asking the database and then outputs a response. MindStudio does the vectorization on your behalf. So instead of having a database, something like a user database where you have the username and the password, or you have a Google Sheet, or you have a WordPress website where your database is basically the list of posts or the list of pages, what the vector is basically any sort of data gets turned into a vector. It doesn't mean if it's a book, if it's a cover, if it's a magazine, if it's a database as well. You can upload CSV files, XLX files, etc. If it's a document, a web page, doesn't matter. It turns that information into a vector, and that vector can then be recalled from a query data source, from RAG, from all the different types of techniques and techniques that we have in MindStudio. MindStudio uses Zilli, which is a very popular provider for vectorizing your database. And the reason that's important, obviously, is that you want good quality outputs whenever you input the query data source. And this is how it looks like on the right. This is MindStudio Trainer, an application we're going to take a look at later. We have a lot of different data sources. We have blog articles, knowledge base, MindStudio functions, and YouTube training. And whenever you call the MindStudio query data source, you're getting something like this, but in vectors. So this is the extracted text. It's the portion of the data set that MindStudio deemed appropriate for the request, and the request is the query. And it's in text format, so you can visualize it, but what the AI actually provides and works upon is the vectors. This is an example of what you can achieve before and after training an AI. So this is just asking about the logic block in MindStudio before training, and this is after providing the correct documentation and YouTube videos. Here on the left, you can see it says, I recommend exploring the following resources, because it doesn't actually know what the logic block in MindStudio is. Here we're using Claude 3 Ico, I believe, or GPT-4 Turbo. Neither of those have any information about the logic block in MindStudio because it's a very new feature of the platform, and the platform as a whole is new. While these models typically stop knowledge, like the cutoff knowledge of these models is around November 2023, or sometimes it's January 2024, but they're not up to date, or at least not all the time. They also can't search the internet by default. So this one on the left is a model on its own, and it can't have any knowledge about what the logic block is. So what it says is the basic answer, like, okay, search on our knowledge base, search the YouTube video, see if you find something helpful. It's not actually providing any answer to your query. It's just saying you can look up something on their website. Here on the right, you don't only see the response of what the logic block is. This is a cut of the actual response. The AI also provides a link to our documentation and a link to our videos. So you have the full description of what the logic block is, the link to the documentation, and the link to the video. So you get the full explanation of something that's actually usable. And you will do this very, very often because sometimes the AI doesn't know about your company, sometimes it doesn't know about your product, sometimes it doesn't know about your tone of voice. And you probably want to instruct it to behave in a certain way without having gigantic prompts all the time. Gigantic prompts are fine, by the way. It's not like it's always wrong. It's actually a good idea if you can afford the token usage, or if you use a very cheap model, it's fine to have a very large prompt. But whenever you have something that's very, very large, like 1 million tokens or something like that, it's probably better to focus on what matters and upload it as a data source and call it just to receive some portions of it rather than the whole entire database. And this is what it looks like inside of MindStudio. So it's just a description. Whenever you add a new data source, it's a description and a list of files. This can be anything that's extractable. So it's a PDF, CSV, XLSX, TXT, docx, or HTML. There is a limit of 50 megabytes per file, 500 words in total, 500,000 words in total, and 150 files maximum. This limit is per app, it's not per account. So if you want to have different data sources because it's too big, you can have that in different apps, and that's fine. And every time you query a data source, though, there is a little charge, and you can find it in the pricing page. So here you should just describe what the list of sources are and what they mean. That's mostly for your own purpose and research. So if you want to understand what the query data source is doing in the future, you probably want to know what these things here are. So you should name them appropriately to understand what they do and what they are. And you should also add a description just for reference in the future. And this is an example of how an actual workflow with a query data source or multiple query data sources actually looks like. So what I showed you before, the before and after picture, is coming from here. This workflow is very simple. It says, it asks the user what they want to know. In that case, it was the logic block in MindStudio. It queries 2 data sources in my MindStudio application and then sends a message. So here we are querying the knowledge base, and here we are querying the YouTube videos. So here we're getting 3 snippets or 5 snippets from the data source, which is the knowledge base of MindStudio. And here, same thing, but we're getting the links to the videos, the context of the videos, and the length of the videos. And then we're combining the data from these 2 data sources in the send message block and sending the final response, which is this is what the logic block is. I learned it from the knowledge base. Here's where you can learn more. And also here are the videos. Knowledge base from here, videos from here. And then we also ask the user to iterate on that, like to give the AI feedback. So we have a menu item, which says, do you want to stop the conversation? Like, are you satisfied with the response? And if they are, they can go to the end block and the conversation ends there. If they're not, and they still want to chat about it, they can still chat with it. And the chat will not only remember the full context of the previous RAG, so query data source 1 and query data source 2, well, it will also call the data source every single time you interact with the chat with the new prompt. So whenever you chat with it, the chat becomes the new query for the database, and it continues to chat with it throughout the entire interaction. And the last one is the jump. So the jump goes back to the main flow, where you select what you want to do and move forward from there. So these are just some common errors when uploading data sources. You can upload some unformatted PDFs. You can use a PDF file that's not extractable. The file might be too large, or it might be protected with a password. I will just stop a second in case there are any questions before we move forward.
We have 2 questions, Giorgio. So the first is, how accurate are your answers?
Yeah, what do you mean by accurate? Like from the data source?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so as long as the data source is correct and it has the information in it, and you're able to retrieve it, it should work fine. It should be very accurate.
Perfect. And then another question is, does filling the description help?
No, it has no difference in the output. It's mostly for you, for self-reference and future-proofing. You should have a description for the data source.
Perfect.
Yeah, Leon said it's 100%. Well, we can't really say 100% because you need the response to be in this output from the query data source, but it should be there as long as the query is correct. One thing that you can do, which is actually quite a nice trick, is refine the query before you send it to the LLM. So instead of sending what the user sent, you could have a query refiner, and that query refiner can then send the query to the data source.
Well, we have few more questions. So the first is for creating data sources, can you print to PDF about 16 pages, which would make everything tiny, but would that work as a training doc?
Yeah, you can. Let me just read that again. Can we print to PDF like 16 pages? It could. It's not exactly going to train the AI. The purpose of a query data source is to find information from a data set. It's not exactly to train it. You can train it with that information. So in our example here, we are training with our knowledge base, and that's training the AI. But it's not going to, I'll give you an example. So when you fine tune a model, you're actually instructing the AI to behave in a certain way. And it will be true for every single interaction the user has with that model, regardless of the workflow. So when you use GPT 3.5, if you use a custom GPT 3.5, then every single interaction with the workflow will follow the same logic with your own fine-tuned model. When you do it with the knowledge base and the training data, that's not exactly what's happening. What's happening is you're querying a data source, you're getting some data from that data source, and that data is then part of the prompt whenever you interact with the AI again. So it is going to instruct the AI to behave in a certain way, but the foundational model, in this case, GPT 3.5, is not going to change. So you're not going to use another model and you're not going to interact with another model. The base layer, the base intelligence layer is exactly the same. The only thing you're doing is adding on top of it. And that thing you're adding on top is the external data source knowledge. Yeah, it says if there is a downside to that. No real downside. It's just going to use a lot of tokens. Like that's the main issue. So depending on which model you're using, that might or might not be a problem. So if you're using something like Claude 3 IQ, which is very, very cheap, not a problem. If you add 1,000 tokens, 2,000 tokens, not a big deal. If you use something like GPT-4 Turbo or Claude 3 Opus, that's going to add to the bill significantly. And Ras says, how do you scrape a website URL into HTML? You can't add a URL as data source for now, but you can add it as an HTML file. So you need to save it as HTML and then upload the data source as HTML. Yes, right now you have to save each page as HTML. You can save in bulk by opening it in bulk. So if you open the entire sitemap of a website, all in different tabs, you can save in bulk, and that should help. You can't really add data source in the main prompt because the main prompt precedes all of the other prompts. So everything that you add in the main prompt should be available throughout the entire duration of the prompt. There's no external workflow to scrape a website for now. Using the data source and RAG is always more convenient on a token side than uploading the whole file. Okay, let's move forward. Whenever you use the query data source, so you can always see what the output looks like. And you should see if the output makes or doesn't make sense. So you query it, then you go in the debugger, you check the debugger, and you check if the debugger contains the information you want to output in the final message. So if you're querying a data set on London for the population, you want to make sure that the output here, that the extracted output, includes the population of London. Because if you need to use that data later on, if that is not present in the extracted data output, it's not going to know it, right? So that's why it's not training, because you're not passing in the full document. If your document has 10 pages, for example, the query data source is going to extract 3 snippets, which is not a lot of text. It's like 1% of that document. And it's not going to send the whole document. It's going to send it 1%. So it's then going to work on that 1% rather than the full document. These are a few use cases for the query data source and for RAG. You can chat with your PDF. You can use the knowledge base, so HTML pages, for example. You can have explore data sets. So if you upload a CSV, it's going to let you explore the data in the CSV. And you can also use it in Zapier, right? So we have the MindStudio Trainer, which has all of our knowledge base, the YouTube videos, the context, and everything else. We are using that in Slack. So whenever a support team or someone from marketing wants to do something with MindStudio, they can start from the Slack channel rather than the MindStudio UI. There's something very, very important here. you should not set your app to public if your knowledge base and if your data source contains anything private. That's because when something is public, when your app is public and it's remixable, someone can remix your app and that will contain the data sources. So whenever you remix some apps on the public web, it's going to contain the data source of the people that uploaded it. So if it's fine, like it's just data source on tone of voice or something like that, that's okay. If it's in something private from your company, you should absolutely not have it as a data source while your app is public. So that was all. I see just one more question on Snowflake. There's no real way. I'm seeing that message for the microphone. There's no real way to connect to Snowflake right now or to connect to any data broker or data warehouse for the time being. But I understand the need, and it's definitely something we can explore. There is no control over embedding parameters or chunking right now. Like we do that for you. So we do it internally in MindStudio, then we provide the chunks and you're going to use the chunks. Alexander asks, how secure is the data when an app is private? Like, can MindStudio see and access an organization's data? We can with your consent. So if we ask for permission, for example, on a ticket and you provide explicit permission, we would, but that's the only instance. Can you explain more about using data source to train your AI and fine tuning? Yeah, I can do that, but it's probably better if I do it while I show you the application. So let's move to an actual example. I have here a PDF insightful scan. So in this example here, I have a chat with the PDF. The PDF is AI Trends for Marketers. It's a report from HubSpot. That's a standard report for marketing people. Whenever I ask something to this report, for example, key insights, actually not seeing the type there. Okay, key insights. You can see that I see the source and it says that the source is page 20. And if you click on the source, it's also going to navigate to the correct source. And the data is here, so in the page 20 and page 21. And this is a response coming from the exact snippets that it received from the query data source. Whenever I start a new thread, they start from 0, but the data source explorer still uses the same PDF. So if I ask something else, like how does Web 10 use AI, which is one of the companies mentioned in this report, I believe they're mentioned in the middle, somewhere around there, page 20. So it should be around somewhere around here. It says, okay, Web 10 recommends starting by identifying areas in marketing activities. Information states AI content generation can help you accelerate your content, etc. Now, how can you know if this is accurate? Because that's the big deal here. Let's go to the previous thread. You can click on this question mark icon and then show debugger. If you show debugger, this is going to show exactly what was sent. So you can see here a snippet, and it contains something like use the following information as context for your response. And this is exactly the chunks that the data source explorer sent to the final workflow, to the final chat. Here's how it looks from the backend. We have a very simple application where there is a start point and an explorer block. So the start is going to be the start of the application and the workflow, and the explorer is going to be the block where we have the PDF on the left side. This can pretty much only be a PDF. I believe it can be a docx as well, but don't try to use the data source explorer for CSVs or XLS because it's not going to look particularly good. Here you can select the data source. I have one data source in this one here. It's called the PDF doc. So PDF doc is then loaded, and this is the query, the template of this. It says, use the following information as context for your message. Query result, based on the information above, answer the following message. So query result is the response of RAG. And the strategy is here, retrieval augmented generation, RAG. So RAG is going to query PDF doc for original message. This is the query in this case. Original message is what you type in on the right side panel. And when you use it for a chat endpoint, let's add one very quickly. Let's add a terminator, and this is a chat terminator. In chat, you can do exactly the same thing. You can click on strategy RAG, data source PDF doc, and max result can be 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. So in this example, it will say use the following information as context, query result. So it's querying it for original message, and the response, the output, is stored in query result, and that's being sent in every interaction with this chat. This means two things. And the Explorer as well, same thing. The Explorer just has a different UI and interaction style, but at the end of the day, each terminator is basically the endpoint for the workflow. So what happens here is we're passing in 3 chunks stored in query result that are queried for the original message. This is obviously increasing the token cost, so that's something you should be aware of, because it's sending more tokens in the prompt, and it's sending more tokens in the prompt every time you interact with the chat. So here it's not a workflow, it's the terminator. And once you're in the terminator, there's no way to get out of the terminator if not by starting a new thread. But it's also informing the AI about something useful. It would not be able to answer the original message without the query result. So obviously, you want the query result to be there. You probably don't want 3 for each chat interaction. You probably want 1. That's why that's the default. The default is 1. But it's going to have the context to answer to the original message. And if you go in the big debugger, like a full debugger, which is inside the editor, let's open it for the previous chat, you can click on show all. And when you click on show all here, it's going to show you the full context. So this is exactly what the query data source outputted and what was inserted in the prompt when I asked key insights. So my sending message, what I asked was key insights. And my final prompt is use the following information as context for your response. Query result. So in debugger, you see the same thing. Use the following information as context for your response. And this is query result, right? So this is the output from the query data source. Then we have, based on the information above, answer the following message. And this is original message. Original message is what I sent in the data source explorer. The same thing happened the second time. I asked, how does Web 10 use AI? It queried the data source for how does Web 10 use AI? And the response from the data source is here. After use the following information as context for your response, this is the query result. And this is where it should understand. The purpose is to make it understand what Web 10 does with the AI. So then it can provide an answer, an informed answer about my query. And lastly, we say, based on information above, answer the following message. How does Web 10 use AI? So that's the full process for this particular data source explorer. And how you do that is by uploading the PDF doc here. We have the marketing report. You can see a preview. You can see the preview, the extracted text. So if your PDF is properly connected, you should be able to see the extracted text in here. So you should basically see the full text. Like there shouldn't be any images here, any links. It should just be the text correlated with your PDF source. You should also see the raw chunks, but for small data sets and for big data sets, they're not always shown. Same thing for raw vectors. But you will always see the extracted text and the preview. So that's how it looks like. This is a very simple process where your chat or your data source explorer will fetch data from your query data source, from your data source here, from the original message. So the query here is very simple. You don't need to understand the query. The query is always going to be whatever you type into that text box. Let's look at a more complicated example. That's actually going to show you how to use it in more robust workflows. And I am seeing all the questions. We're gonna leave a bit more space for Q&A because I see we have many here. Okay, so we have data sources here. We have multiple, and we have a main flow that redirects to different workflows with a menu. So this is a real workflow. The data sources here are a CSV. This is air quality data. If you need to test this stuff, you can use a website named Kaggle or Kaggle, not sure how to pronounce it, but they have a datasets portions, and here you have a lot of demo datasets. So if you want to test RAG and see if it works fine and you still don't have your own official data source, just use one of these examples. They're built exactly to test AIs. So I have air quality here. This is a CSV. I have country data, and again, a CSV. I have the IMDb top 250 movies in XLSX, so Excel file. I have a PDF, which is the same marketing report as before, the population for Urla, which is a city in Turkey, I believe, and Walmart sales, another CSV. You can see the preview for all of these, and you should make sure that it makes sense, and the extracted text. Same thing, they should be populated. You should see some stuff in here, some data. If this is empty or if this returns an error, then the AI will return an error and not know the context or what you're asking it to do. The marketing report is a PDF. You can see the XLSX also renders here in the preview with the columns, the extracted text. And let's see if we do get the raw chunks in here, but I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, you do get the raw chunks when there is an actual database. So in this case, there is a CSV, and here are the chunks for the raw chunks, chunk 1, chunk 2, and you even get the raw vector. So this is actually what we're converting your data set to. The CSV is becoming this. This is the raw vector that's being used as the data source. And again, this is the entry flow. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay. We have a simple menu. We are redirecting to the marketing report if you want to chat with the marketing report. Walmart sales, if you want to chat with that CSV. Without RAG, it's going to be a query without the RAG option, and then the multiple data sets. So let's look at these flows. The first one looks like this, marketing report. We have a start point and a chat endpoint. And the chat endpoint is going to use the marketing report data source with the strategy RAG. And the result here is going to be extremely similar to what we've just seen in the Data Source Explorer. Then we have multiple data sets. So here we are not querying one data set, we are querying 2. When that happens, and this will happen quite frequently when you build real applications and workflows with MindStudio, you need to understand the query template, this part here. This is the most important portion and something that I see not correct many times in tickets and chats and Discord chats, DMs, etc. So whenever we are using AI in MindStudio, we give you the option to choose the AI model. So if I click on a send message block, you can see model settings, and below that, model. And here you can pick your model. There is an inherited model, which is in the model settings for the whole workflow, but that's just the general model for all different blocks. So unless you change it, that's going to be the model for your block. But you can change it for the send message. If I want the send message block to use Claude 3 Opus, I can select it. If I want to use Code Llama, I can select it. Or I can choose to inherit it from the main flow, from the model settings, and it's going to be Claude 3 Haiku in this example. When I click on a query data source, you will see that there's no model settings. And the reason is that query data source does not use AI. There is no AI usage, no model usage, and no instruction or prompt in the query data source. The query data source is a MindStudio function that we provide to query the data set, which we also provide through Zilli, I believe is the name. And you get a response, which you then use in a send message block, because that response is stored in a variable. In this example, is country data, and here is air quality. But this is not a LLM. I can't go in here and say, find the key insights about this, because this is not going to do anything. This is like going on Google and saying, find the key insights about cats. That's not how you search on Google. And when you search on Google, you're doing something very similar to querying a data source. It's just that the data source of Google is obviously ginormous. But this is like searching on Google, find the key insights about cats, instead of searching for cats. But when you look on Google, you're going to get a few snippets, a few links, like 10 links on the first page. And that's going to be the response you want. That's what Google wants to provide you, and that's what you want to get from Google, most likely. And how you do that is by querying for cats, not the full string that you actually want to know about. Same thing here. Usually, like 90% of the cases, you are going to query a data source for one variable. So in this example, the variable is multiple datasets question. What's that? That's simply a long text input here. So I have it here. I'm asking the user, what do you want to know? The user will type it in here, and this will be the query data source, like the Google search, as an example, to the query data source, to the data source here. Let's see what that looks like. We have it in multiple datasets. Actually, let me show you the send message as well. So what the send message does after that, since this response is stored in air quality and this response is stored in country data, the send message block is saying answer to this question from human, and the question is in multiple datasets _ question. You can use context from these sources and choose the right one based on the query. The user could ask about air quality, it could ask about country data, or it could ask about cats. So in these three examples, I want the AI to perform a different operation. If it's asking about air quality, it should take context from the air quality dataset. If it's asking about country data, I want it to take it from there. And if it's asking about something completely irrelevant, I probably want to ignore it. And you can add that as a rule here. So I'm passing in countries data, GDP, and other in country data. That's the variable, and you can find it here. This is the variable name for this query data source, and you can use it here. This will contain the response of this query block. And then air quality data, which uses the variable air quality, which again contains the response of this query data source block. Let's publish it, go on the live version, and test it out. So let's go in new thread. It's multiple data sets, and let's ask about top countries by GDP per capita. So this is going to query two data sources. It will query both air quality data and country data. But it's going to choose the snippets from the country data to provide this response, because obviously I asked something that's in that data set, not in the air quality data set. So I can click on next and chat with it. Now let's try the opposite. Let's say multiple data sets, and I want to know top 10 countries by air quality. It's going to do exactly the same thing. It's going to query both data sources, but it's going to return, well, actually, it should have returned. It should return the air quality. Let's try it one more time. So I like top 10 countries ranked by air quality. And if not, we're going to troubleshoot it live. So helpful for everyone. Okay. Based on the air quality data provided, here are the top 10 countries ranked by air quality. And these are the countries. It does seem to make sense to me, but we're going to check it in the response. So now let's go back to the editor in the debugger, and these are the two interactions we just had. Top 10 countries by GDP per capita and top 10 countries ranked by air quality. So this is GDP per capita, this is air quality. I believe the reason it didn't work is that for some reason I sent it before it was completed. So you can see that the question was truncated. So top countries by GDP per capita, this is what we're sending. The received result is country, child mortality, etc. These are all the chunks. And what we received in the end is answer to this, the process message in the end. This is actually very helpful. So let me explain this just slightly. The final programmatic message is the send message block. And it's going to show you the sending message, which is the non-rendered version of your prompt, which contains variables, for example. And then below that, you have the resolved message, which is the same as the sending message, but with the variables in output, like the rendered variables. So here it's answer to this question from human, and it says variable multiple datasets question. This is a variable, it's not rendering. Then here you see answer to this question from human, top countries by GDP per capita. So it's rendering this variable above. Same thing here, you can use context from these sources, and these are the sources. Here I have country data and their quality, doesn't mean much, but it lets you understand what's in there. And then below, you can see this is the chunk we got from GDP. And somewhere around here, we will also have air quality data, right? So this is all we got with all the data for the query data source block 1, and this is all we got for the query data source 2. As you can see, we got significantly more data than we did in the previous AI workflow. And the reason is the number of chunks. So if you go back here, you can see of results. Actually, it's a better way to say it. We are getting 3 results here. We are not querying the database 1 time. We are querying it 3 times. We are doing it for the same exact query template, but we're doing it 3 times to get a larger output. And we do want this because what if the first query doesn't include the best air quality country? Or what if the first query to the GDP per capita dataset doesn't include the richest country in the world? We are going to miss on data that we do want in that prompt because we do want the AI to know what's the best GDP per capita because that's in my answer. That's what the user wants to know. So by querying it multiple times, you can increase the size of the chunk and increase the likelihood that the chunk contains the response you want. So this is very, very helpful. You should always have at least 3, I believe, when you query the data source. When you have it in RAG, 1 is more than enough. You can just select the data source here. It can be air quality or country data, or it can be something else entirely, or you can even turn it off and not have RAG in the chat. But here, you should probably have 2 to 3. The maximum is 5. You can't go above 5. To answer one question before, I remember someone asked if this is kept in memory. It is. So once this is queried and this is queried and you get to the chat endpoint, if you chat with it, it will remember these 2 query data source responses. That's because every time you interact with the AI, it will remember the previous interactions and add in the latest one. So it will remember these 2 query. It will remember the main prompt. And that's all. If you add RAG, it will remember these 2 plus query it again for this template. So for every chat interaction that you have, it will query the data source, get back the response, and send it to the user in the prompt. Okay. Just to show you the difference, here in the debugger, you can see that this interaction was very, very big already. We're spending 12,000 tokens, which is 0.004. If you use an expensive model here, it's going to make a very, very big difference. So if I go to multiple data sets and you switch the model to Claude 3 Opus, for example, that's going to be like 10 cents, even 20 cents, because Claude 3 Opus is much more expensive. When you query data sources, especially when you query large data sources, it's very smart to choose something like Claude 3 Haiku or Gemini Pro, Mixtral, and Gemini 3.5. Like all of these are very cost-effective models that are still going to do the job. Here in Walmart sales, I have the same thing, but with just 1 query data source. So we have the user input where you ask questions about sales of Walmart. You're querying the data source. Again, no AI here, no instruction, no nothing. The query is just the question. And I'm querying it for 3 responses. Let's select Walmart sales here. The send message is answer to this question. You can actually make it a bit more obvious, like answer to human question. Then that's the question. And here are the snippets from the data source for extra context. And this is the response from this query data source. Let's test it out just 1 second. And let's actually chat with it. So let's add Walmart sales as RAG as well. Okay. Let's open a new thread. Let's go on Walmart sales. And we want to know top sold items. Let's open the debugger. So it's querying the data source. The query is top sold items, which is what I just inserted as question. It's outputting it to Walmart sales. Then we're sending the response, and this is the computed response. So it's not going to show it all here. You have to go back to the editor, but you get the gist of it. Basically, this is the snippet, and this is the response that you see here. Let's try to chat with it. So let's try to go here and like, what are the most popular stores? I don't know if that's actually in the data, but we're going to find out soon. So what this is doing is querying it and saying, use the following information in your response. And if you remember, this is part of the query template for RAG. This is not the previous block of query data source. This is RAG. And how do you know that it's using the previous response as well? You know because of the prompt size. So if you look at the prompt size is this output here, 7,485 tokens, plus the new interaction, plus the new prompt and the new response. So the total is now 10,000 tokens. And if you go further, let's go like, what are the most sold candies? Again, not sure if it's actually in the data source. Doesn't seem to be in it, that's fine. But you can see this is now 10,213. So this is adding another query data source. If you want to be 100% sure that that's remembered, you should display to the user, or you should have RAG in the chat. Because after a certain limit, it will not be remembered. So if you want it to be remembered all the time, this is how you should do it. You should use RAG in chat. And when you do it, this is what it looks like. It uses the following information as your response, and this is what the response looks like. And if you're doing it with a PDF or a document, I suggest not using the chat endpoint. You should use the Data Source Explorer for that. And last thing, I just wanted to show you what it looks like without RAG, right? So we use 10,000 tokens with RAG. Let's try to do without RAG. So let's publish this one. Just check if it's all correct. So here we are uploading a file, and then we're asking a question on that file, which is obviously inconvenient in general because you're going to have to re-upload that file every single time. But just to see what that looks like, let's try to upload country data, which is the same data source as before. And the question is, what are the top 10 countries by GDP per capita? So it's going to get the right answer. That's going to be correct. But for this one, I'm not entirely sure, but it should already be a little bit higher. I believe this is a little bit higher than before. But if you upload something very, very big, for example, this coffee shop is a very large data set, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's taking a long time to load. The problem with the file upload versus data source is that the file upload is literally going to extract the whole document or the whole data source and include it in the prompt. So if your document has 500,000 words, it will add 500,000 words to the prompt, while RAG will only get 3 snippets out of the whole thing. So let's ask, I don't know what this data source is about. Let's ask, what are the best coffees? Okay. So there's definitely something that went wrong here. Let's go back there and check. So this is no RAG file. We are uploading the report. It's empty. As you can see here, it says undefined. Yeah. Okay, let's try with another one. Let's try with the open air quality. And let's ask for the cleanest air again. Let's see in the debugger if this worked fine this time. Another cool thing about the data source is that you can actually see the error. You can see what's wrong with it. You can't really do that with the file upload. It's not going to tell you what's the error. It's just going to tell you that there is an error. Yeah, same thing. It's not doing that. Okay. Let me just check the variable name in case I did that wrong, but it seems to be correct for me. And it does work with smaller ones. Yeah, it's correct. Yeah, this is quite odd. Let me try with the small one. I think the IMDb movies list is quite small. It's 45 kilobytes, so. See what's happening in the debugger. Yeah, okay. So this worked. And it already used almost 15,000 tokens for something that was very, very small. So it highlights this this issue where if you don't use RAG, you're gonna spend a lot of tokens. And again, for Claude 3 Ico, it's not going to look that impressive because it's like less than half a cent. But when you use Opus or when you use another model, that's very significant. And secondly, this is the entire document. So let's go back to the editor in the debugger. And you can see here that this is literally the entire 250 movies loaded in the response, in the prompt. So this is fine in this example. But if your document is very large and it's like 2,000 different movies, you probably don't need the 2,000 movies in the prompt. That's going to cost a lot of tokens and it's not really needed. You probably need just a chunk that's more relevant to the user question. And that's pretty much it. Let me just check if we can look at another example here. We could have one for the URLA population, which is also raw chunks and raw vectors. And oh yeah, let me actually tell you more about this data source highlight here. So whenever you click on a data source here, like air quality, you will have a few data details in here. So we have the document number, we have the word count, and we have the number of vectors. So this one is actually quite a large data set. It's 158,000 words, which means that if you actually were to input this as a file, it would be 200,000 tokens in prompt plus everything else. And if that's part of a chat, if it's not part of a chat, if it's a one-time send, it's going to send it one time, remember it one time, spend it one time. If it's part of a chat conversation, that's going to be sent every time you interact with it. So if the first prompt and response is 250,000 tokens, then you add a prompt of 1,000, then it will be 260,000, it will be 350,000, and blah, blah, blah. So it's going to be very expensive very quickly. When you use RAG, this will maybe be 10 or something like that. 10,000, I mean. The country data is 38 words, so there's definitely something weird in here. I guess the numbers are not counted as words, but the vectors are 4,600. The marketing report is 5,000 words and 15,000 tokens, vectors. So all of this is fine. You can also test your queries here to see what the response would be, and that should be quite helpful. So I just wanted to let you know that and clarify one thing about the token usage in the chat, because I believe that's going to be important. So let's go in the marketing report, which is just a start and chat endpoint. You don't really need to publish every time. I just do it out of habit. So if you click on new thread and marketing report, let's go to the chat. Okay. And ask for key insights. I didn't spell that right, but yeah, I will figure it out. So these are the key insights. That's fine. And then let's ask for something else. Like, can you give me a longer list? And then we can ask, what do people use AI for according to the report? Let's show the debugger. So the first interaction here used almost 2,000 tokens, 1.6K in prompt and 272 in response. The second one used 2,199. And you can see the prompt is now this one almost, plus the new response. And then the third one is 2,500, etc. This is a bit of a weird thing compared to the other interactions in MindStudio. Because if you don't use RAG, then the sum of the above plus the response of the bottom will be the total. Let me show you an example because it's very confusing to explain without seeing it. So let's add a new chat workflow here. Let's call it just chat. Let's add it to the menu very quickly. Okay. Just chat. Let's add chat. And let's connect it. So this one is going to be a chat. There's no endpoint. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, okay, there's no RAG. Cool. So when you chat with something normal, just with the model, every new chat, like let's say hi. We can ask how's the weather today. Let's do very short things. What are you? Okay. If you show the debugger, you can see the first interaction is 10 tokens, which is 9 in response and 1 in prompt. The second interaction is 15 in prompt and 13 in response. Then it's 22 in response and 56 in prompt. And the final prompt is 56 as well. So whenever you interact with it, this is going to be more expensive because it's going to send something from the previous interaction and something from the new interaction. When you do it with RAG, it's kind of similar, but this portion is likely going to be the same. Like when you ask for a portion from the query data source, this could be the same. Okay, I know that there are a lot of questions, so I will stop now, but more than happy to answer questions. Let me just see in the chat here, or if you, yeah, we don't have Q&A here because it's not a webinar. Okay, I already see the, sorry, will the rolling lazy summary help with this? I'm not sure what the rolling lazy summary is. Like, what do you mean by that? Okay, can you just clarify that? And Jose is asking, is it possible to take an output and save it into the data source query that output later in the workflow? Yes, I believe I'm getting it. Let me just share my screen 1 second. You can definitely refine the prompt. So for example, here we are querying the data source for the variable multiple datasets question, right? So the user can write whatever they want in here. They can write, I want to know about cats. And maybe you don't want to send that to the query data source. Maybe you want to format it, you want to refine it before you send that as a query to the data source. If you want to do that, you can easily do that with a send message block. And here you can say like, like assistant will turn this, and this being the question, which is multiple data sets question, into a proper query for a data set. Do not output anything else other than the query. You can save this as variable, and the variable can be query. So then the value here, query, can be what you query the data source with. So instead of multiple data sets question, you replace this with query. And now you have a workflow where the user enters something, the AI, which can be any AI you want, you can use a high intelligence AI here because there's not really a lot of tokens being used. You're asking for something pretty simple. You're just asking to reformat a line, a string. You can use Claude 3 Opus, get the query. It will be a very high quality query because Claude 3 Opus is incredibly smart. And then you're passing it to the query data source. And the query data source will return the chunks, and you can use the chunks in the send message block. And maybe the final send message block uses Claude 3 IQ, which is much more cheaper. But when you need the intelligence layer, so like to produce the query or to output the proper query, you can use Claude 3 Opus or GPT-4 Turbo or some higher intelligence model, if that's what you were asking for. But I see that you raised your hand, so yeah.
Yeah, Giorgio, if I can jump in really quick. So
Yeah, go ahead.
that that list that you got in the final output, I was wondering, like, can you save that list into the query, into the database section?
Oh, okay. So you want to save the interactions as a data source, basically, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I realized I
It-
mistyped my question.
No, that's fine. It's a very useful thing, I believe. It's not possible right now, but I believe it's very useful. So it's something I will suggest internally as well. Like we can add it as a feature request.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned a really good point that with RAG, it'll just pull out very specific outputs related to that query. And right now I have, like, I'm producing pretty long lists, but I don't need the full list. wanted to just save that very long list into the data source and then write a query, pull this portion out from that output because I don't need the whole thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it makes
that was
sense.
my question.
Yeah, RAG can definitely be extended more. Like we had users asking it for file uploads. So when you upload a file, maybe you want to do RAG on that. Or it can be on one of the outputs of the send message block. We can do RAG on that and only get a portion of that in the following message. So it can be expanded for sure. It's not currently possible, but it's
Okay,
a very useful
cool.
template.
Good to know. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, Rob says, in the chat termination portion, can the user give a thumbs up or thumbs down if the response was not good? No, they can't. The chatbot does continue on. That being said, you can use a menu to iterate on the feedback of the user. So you can add a menu block and you can say, okay, the user wants to end the conversation, they want to continue chatting, or they want to go back to the main flow. And bye to everyone that needs to go. I can stay a bit longer if you have more questions. So yeah, you can't have the thumbs up, thumbs down kind of feedback, but you can have a menu, and the menu can do different things based on the output. So you can send them back to the beginning of the workflow, for example, or you can send them to another workflow. You can end the chat. You can do different things. Jonathan is asking, is semantic chunking of a large document something I should prepare outside of ML Studio, then upload into data source? I don't think so. I think that the current vectorization should be able to take care of that. But if you do try and you see problems with that, feel free to open a ticket and maybe reference me. Like you can say attention of George or something like that, and someone will forward it to me. And Sav asks, what prompt or user block do we pick if user wants to move to the end block chat? Yeah, let me show you that. So the usual terminator in MindStudio is the chat endpoint. So this one here. And I'm not actually sharing. Okay, so the actual usual one is chat, this one here. Every terminator block is green, so that's how you can recognize them on the workflow screen. But if you right click on any point in the canvas and then go on terminator, this one here, You can see the chat is just one of the Terminator blocks. You can have the chat, you can have a revised document, data source explorer, and end of session. Data source explorer can let you build something like what you've seen in the beginning, which is a PDF, chat with PDF kind of thing, where you have the data source on the left and the chat on the right. And it will always source and reference the chat, the document on the left. Revised document is pretty much a Google Doc editor or a Word editor. It's going to output the response in an editor, and you can change stuff. You can even have, like, if you click on it, you can see that one of it is strategy RAG. So you can have the editor include snippets from your data sources as well. And by default, it's also able to iterate on the user selected fields. So selected text is what you highlight. So in the editor, when you highlight something, you can ask the AI to rewrite it. And selected text is one of our default variables that only works within the revised document, which takes in the selected text, send it to the AI, and ask it to do something. And that something is instructions. Again, this is in the UI of revised document. It will only work in that context. But if you leave the prompt as is, it's basically going to rewrite whatever you want in the flow, and it will rewrite it with AI. And it can also use RAG to rewrite it. So if you want to add additional context and you want factual information for all of your editor outputs, you can do that with RAG. We also have Data Source Explorer. This is the left side document, right side chat, and the end session. So the end session is what just ends the conversation. This is not going to do anything. I'm honestly not sure why we have this here, the message processing. We might want to remove it because this is literally an end, an end block to the conversation. And if you send people here, like from send message, you send people to end, this workflow is just going to end, and that's all. But you can see that Terminator blocks can just hang around and you can connect them to different blocks. It's just with the new workflow builder where you can have multiple workflows and you can have conditions and everything like that, you can have multiple terminators and have different outputs depending on what the user do. So you can even have 3, like you can have a jump block, which is not a terminator actually. A jump block is just going to send people to another part of your workflows. So you can send them to marketing report or you can send them back to main. And if you connect send message to this jump block, this is then going to send it there. And you can mix and match everything you want in the canvas. Okay. Then it says, what prompt or user block do we pick? Okay, that's fine. Is there an option for users to go back and upload a new data set without opening a new chat? No, because you're the one uploading the data sets. Like when you use RAG, you add them to the editor. It's not the user that adds the files every time they interact with the chatbot or the AI. So the data source is part of your workflow and you upload them in the editor as the company or the developer of this application. The user just interacts with the workflow, which includes RAG, but it's not going to be a file upload from them or something that they can edit on the go. If you need something that they can edit on the go, then it's a file upload. It's a different thing. You can use the file upload type and they can upload a PDF, a docx, or an XLS file, and then you can work on that. And they can change it. It can even be an onboarding message. So if you want the file to always stay there and be present every time they interact with the application, the file upload can be an onboarding variable. But if you use it as a data source, you're the only one as the company or admin or developer of the application that can interact with it. Oh, Stephen. Okay. Yeah, Stephen meant when he was saying about the rolling thing. There is one here. The summarization engine will have rolling here. So this account is a staff account, so it's not going to say it. But in your example, it will say the rolling strategy. I'm not exactly sure it will help with RAG because the summarization strategy, yeah, it's here, rolling lazy summary. So automatically prune messages means that once you reach the context window of the model, then it's going to just remove the messages that went right before. So it's going to cut the message and prune it to fit the context window of the model. And it's going to ignore it. So it will forget everything that doesn't fit in the context window of the model. And something like Claude 3 IQ has a very large context window. It's 200,000 tokens, but something like Gemini Pro only has 30,000. And something like GPT 3.5 only has 16,000. And GPT-4, actually, not the Turbo. Turbo has 128,000. GPT-4 has 8,000 tokens. So it's actually the smallest kind of context window we have in MindStudio. So that's what the token overflow strategy is. If you want to avoid that, you can summarize the data. This should be available on accounts. I believe it is. So you can summarize the data, and that will reduce the context window size. And then another thing that we want to do, the rolling lazy summary, is that it's going to summarize the data 2 times basically and send the summary to a variable on the side. I believe this is what's going to happen. We're going to send the summary to a variable and recall the variable during the workflow. But this is not live yet. That's why it says coming soon. It's still in development. It's just we're trying to find the best way to reduce token usage to fit within the smaller context windows of some of these models. That being said, the trend is definitely bigger and bigger context windows. Claude 3 Haiku and Claude 3 Opus, Claude 3 Sonnet, the Claude 3 family already are supposedly able to analyze and handle 1 million tokens. That's what Anthropic said. Gemini Pro 1.5 also has a 1 million tokens context window. The new GPT-5, which is rumored to be coming in the summer, is probably going to be at least twice the size of GPT-4 Turbo. So the trend is definitely upwards. If you do need something bigger, then RAG is probably the solution for now. But we're going to add more tools to summarize the output or to summarize the full token input. We can add options like continue generating. Like we can have a lot of different troubleshooting mechanisms or quality of life improvements to basically handle smaller context windows. But at the end of the day, if the model cannot handle it, it cannot handle it. We can't really do much about it. Jim says, can you elaborate more on the query data techniques and refinement? Yeah, so the query data source is typically just a keyword. You can imagine it as a keyword. So if we go back to multiple data sets, this is just a keyword. Let me share. Here is just a keyword, and the keyword is multiple datasets question. So the difference is that without refinement, without refining the prompt, the keyword is going to come from a variable, from the user input in this example. The problem is that the user input is from the human, from a human, and the human can write whatever they want in a long text input. They can write how many iPads Apple sold in the last quarter in this block. If they do, that's going to be the query for the query data source. And that makes absolutely no sense because the query data source is for country data. And here is air quality. So you have 2 options there. You either tell the AI that it shouldn't answer to anything that's not related to country data or air quality, or you can refine the prompt before, you can refine the query before with a send message block, and then you send the refined query to the country data, to the air quality, and to the final message. And if you do that, you're removing externalities. You're removing problems that might arise when a human interacts with your workflow, because now it's the machine that basically does everything on its own. The machine is deciding its own query, then it's sending that query to the query data source, and then you're also referring to that query in the final send message block. And that query here might be, please turn this query, whatever the human inputted, into something better, which is what we did here. Or you can even do it into something else. So you can say, please try to understand how these particular question from the user concerns air quality or country data. And then it will return a query that takes what the human input plus does some editing on its own to make it fit the actual query data source parameters, and then sends it to the query parameters. So the refining is just adding a send message block to ask the AI to improve a manual variable the user added. And you can do it for all sorts of things, by the way. It's not just for RAG. Like if you have the human insert something about their tone of voice, it's usually a good idea to add a prompt refiner, so another send message block, to ask the AI to actually detail their tone of voice. Because when you ask the tone of voice to someone, or when you ask humans to generally describe something long, they're not going to do it. So for tone of voice, they're going to say engaging, but engaging doesn't mean anything. It's not an actual tone of voice. Usually the tone of voice is a set of rules, a set of examples. So when you want an actual tone of voice, you can take the prompt, the initial response from the user, and you can add it to the prompt. So in the prompt for the send message block, you can say, this is what human said. And the human in this case said, the tone of voice is engaging. Please turn this into an actual tone of voice document. Give me examples. give me example outlines, give me a full tone of voice description, like how does how should the AI sound, how should it write, what does it mean, and it will give you maybe a document of the guidelines to fit that tone of voice. And then that's the tone of voice variable you use. You don't use the initial one, what the user gave you. You use the refined version from the first send message block as the variable later on. So that's actually very useful, especially when you do like article writing or code outputs, things like that. The humans are typically, the humans, well, us, we are usually going to be very, very succinct with our answers because we don't like to type. And when your answer needs to be detailed or very long, then you should ask the AI to probably make it longer or to explain it a little bit better. Jim says, how do you define precisely the content that is sent to the revised document? Yeah, I feel like I mentioned it, so I can just show you very, very quickly, like 1 minute. We can have the chat workflow turn into a revised document. So let's add a send message here, reply to the user, the human, write an outline about a cat, about an article on cats. So there's no dynamic stuff here. We're just doing this. And then as the final behavior, let's have a revised document. So let's do that. Open published app, new thread. Well, actually it's already there, but let's do a new one. So let's click on chat. It will return an outline. This is the send message block. And when you click on next, we're going to revise document. A revised document is this document builder, the editor. When you select something, you can see this magic wand on the right side. And when you select something, you're entering this mode here, this selected text. So what I selected right now goes inside of this variable here, selected text. And then here on the right side, when you click on it, you have the instructions. So alternative, for example, alternative conclusion. You submit, it's going to take the context of the previous response, and it knows it's about an outline. It's not going to generate something random. And you can see the revision request. You can approve it or deny it. Let's approve it. And it will replace the previous text with the new one. So when you select the text that's passed as the prompt or the input that you want to change, these are the instructions. So these are the rules you want the AI to follow. And the context is basically everything around it. So it has the context on the document because that's what you're asking to edit. Stephen asks, so we should not summarize financial or technical data. You can, it depends on your use case. If you always need the data to be there, then no. If you need just a general summary because you want it to follow your company tone of voice or your company information, then sure. Like if you have 1,000 pages on your company and you want all of that in the prompt, but it doesn't fit, then sure, summarize it. It's probably fine. But if you need to know, again, the top countries by GDP in the world, you need all the countries in the world to be there. Otherwise, you cannot know what's the best one. Like, how do you know that? I believe it's Luxembourg, the best one, or Norway. How can you know it's Norway if you don't analyze Norway? You know, if you only have France, for example, as the top GDP country, the AI is going to say, well, France is the highest GDP country because in that chunk of data, that's true. But overall, in the real data set, it's not true. France is not the highest GDP. So it depends on the factual data you're looking for and if summarization makes sense for your use case. Okay, Jim says, the problem is when you have multiple messages before the revised document, which message is picked by the revised document? Okay, that's interesting. So I should test it because it's actually one of the only things I didn't test. I believe right now that everything that you display to the user is going to be part of the revised document prompt. So it's going to be part of basically the prompt of this final block here. So if you in any way or form, you display the output of a query data source to the user, so with a send message block display to user, that's going to be part of the prompt. Or if you include it in the template here. So if you go in here, you can actually change the template of this revised document. You're not forced to use this. Just know that you can use these two variables only in the revised document. But if you have a query data source before, you're querying Walmart sales and saving it in Walmart for random. We're not going to create a variable here. You can have the document refer to that. So you can say additional context coming from, or additional context, and that's all. Let's have it Walmart. So like this, every time the user tries to revise something in the document, it's gonna take whatever this output was, because the variable is still in the workflow, right? Like as long as the thread is active and the user is interacting with it, the variable is storing the data. So you can use that data in the query template, and that's probably going to fix your issue. And if you need two, you can add two. Like you can have additional context, Walmart, and Walmart 2. This is going to significantly increase the number of tokens again. So you should always test with, I always suggest you test with Claude 3 Haiku or Mixtral or one of these cheap models, just to understand how many tokens you need. And then you can switch to the higher intelligence models. Sava asks, selected text on revised doc cannot be pulled back into a previous workflow. No. Once you arrive to the terminator, that's the terminator of the workflow. That's all. Like it's actually a terminator of the whole thread. You can't go back from a chat endpoint terminator to anywhere else. But if you use jumps, like that's only true for the terminator. If you use jumps, so you collect a variable in here, and then you jump to another workflow here, you can still use that variable. Like within the thread, you can jump in and out of workflows, and the variable will be stored in the thread. And the functionality of the wand is limited to text summaries and improvements. Not really. The wand can do pretty much whatever you want the wand to do. You just need to change the revised document template here. So instead of saying rewrite the following text, you can say continue from the following text. And that's actually helpful for article writers. If you're building an article writer and you want the AI to continue writing on a certain section, in a certain section, you can do that. You can say continue writing from selected text. And instead of rewriting it, it will just continue writing that section. Okay, I believe that's all. We're also quite over time. So I think it was a very interesting discussion, and I hope it was helpful. I understand it's quite of a nuanced topic, but I hope it gave you a bit more clarity, and we'll send the recording over, and thank you for being here.